Reflecting on the past, I can't help but acknowledge that perhaps I should have harbored some inkling of suspicion when my wife Tracy returned home from her job at the art gallery, brimming with excitement over a new patron. Yet, when you place absolute trust in someone and they've never given you a reason to doubt them in the 17 years you've been together, it's natural to dismiss any fleeting doubts that may arise. My name is Bobby, and Tracy and I first crossed paths at a quaint university in the Midwest nearly 2 decades ago. Our courtship commenced 17 years back, leading to our marriage 16 years ago. Parenthood soon followed, blessing us with a daughter 14 years ago and a son 12 years ago. By profession, I'm a programmer employed by a state institution. While my income is stable, it's not extravagant, but it has been sufficient to afford Tracy the opportunity to be a devoted stay-at-home mother during our children's formative years. 2 years ago, Tracy felt the time had come for her to venture back into the workforce. With her background in art, she secured a position at a prestigious art gallery in the city, working 30 hours a week. Despite the clientele being more affluent than us, residing in a bustling Midwest city ensured a steady stream of patrons with a penchant for fine art. Tracy's role primarily involved engaging with customers and guiding them through the gallery's exhibitions. Occasionally, she would find herself mingling with high-profile clients at exclusive events. On such occasions, I would accompany her as her guest, relishing the opportunity to immerse myself in the world of the affluent, albeit as a mere computer enthusiast. Tracy often returned home bubbling with enthusiasm after encounters with celebrities or influential personalities. In hindsight, Tracy's fervour for her work should have prompted a closer examination of her interactions with certain patrons. However, at the time, it seemed like nothing more than genuine enthusiasm for her newfound professional endeavour. I watched Tracy move around the house with a sense of admiration, marvelling at her grace as she navigated through the rooms. Yet, as the days passed, reality began to sink in, revealing the role she truly occupied in our lives. Tracy wasn't known for her sunny disposition. More often than not, her presence cast a shadow, driving the kids to seek solace in their rooms, leaving me to absorb the brunt of her cutting remarks about our life together. Despite the sting of her words, I found myself adopting a stoic demeanour, seeking refuge in the familiar solace of my garage, where I would tinker away at my car, finding solace in the rhythmic hum of the engine. In recent weeks, Tracy's conversations had been consumed by tales of a new patron at the art gallery where she worked. Jackson Aloysius Fairchild, a 28-year-old millionaire with a penchant for luxury, had become a regular visitor, seeking to adorn his opulent new abode with artworks that mirrored his elevated status. Tracy spoke of him with a mixture of admiration and skepticism, noting his self-absorbed nature in passing. However, her excitement over this new patron was not uncommon, and I paid little heed to her musings, allowing her to revel in her enthusiasm as she pleased. As the weeks rolled by, Tracy's chatter about Fairchild gradually subsided, and I thought little of it until the evening of the Christmas Gala concert at the gallery. It was there that I came face to face with Fairchild for the first time. He stood before me, an imposing figure, towering at about 6 feet 2 inches, clad in an impeccably tailored Armani suit that exuded an air of wealth and refinement. His blonde hair and piercing blue eyes lent him an almost ethereal aura, leaving an indelible impression on me, even in my state of exhaustion. Tracy introduced us with an air of excitement, her eyes sparkling with anticipation. Yet, as Fairchild's gaze met hers, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that washed over me. It was as though he was studying her with a predatory intensity, his eyes lingering on her form with a hunger that belied his polished exterior. Despite Tracy's radiant appearance in a chic ensemble, she seemed oblivious to the scrutiny, engrossed in the festivities unfolding around her. But in that moment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, a nagging suspicion that lingered at the back of my mind as I exchanged pleasantries with Fairchild, masking my unease behind a facade of politeness. I observed Tracy engrossed in conversation with a group that included Jackson Fairchild, prompting me to retreat to the bar. There, I fixed Tracy's favourite drink and returned to her side. As I handed her the wine, I discreetly removed Jackson's hand from her thigh. He offered me a smug grin before retracting his hand without a word. Engaging in conversation with the group for a while longer, I eventually veered off in another direction, keeping an eye out to ensure Jackson didn't follow Tracy. However, my unease grew when an hour passed and I couldn't locate Tracy anywhere in the gallery. Fearing the worst, I stepped outside and scanned the parking lot where small groups of people were dispersing. Yet Tracy was nowhere to be found among them. It was then that I noticed a couple nestled closely in the back seat of a sleek black Jaguar XJ. The car's engine hummed softly, and the couple seemed remarkably at ease with each other. Although I couldn't confirm their identities from a distance, my gut told me it was Tracy and Jackson. Approaching the car, I swung open the passenger door, causing the woman inside to startle upright. Their reactions confirmed my suspicions. They were either about to kiss or were already on the brink of it. Maintaining composure, I informed them that it was time to depart, my voice carefully measured to conceal the turmoil roiling within me. As they exchanged uneasy glances, I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger and hurt. Tracy's betrayal cut deep, and the realization that she was with Jackson in such an intimate setting shattered the facade of trust and stability that had defined our marriage for so long. With a heavy heart, I made my way back into the gallery, grappling with the harsh reality of the situation and unsure of how to proceed. In a trembling voice, I insisted, "We really need to leave now." But Jackson just grinned at me, unfazed by my urgency. "I don't care," I continued, my tone becoming firmer. "It's time for us to go." Ignoring my plea, Jackson persisted, "Bobby, you've got to hear this sound system. It's absolutely amazing." As he spoke, music blared from the stereo, filling the car with its vibrant melodies. Despite his enthusiasm, neither of us seemed particularly interested in the music or the car's audio system. "Jackson, seriously, we really should leave," I said, trying to avoid further confrontation. Guiding Tracy out of the car, we began making our way towards my Ford F-150 parked nearby. However, Tracy was resolute in her decision. "I can't leave just yet. The party is supposed to go on for another 2 hours, she protested, her voice tinged with determination. "And I'm expected to stay until the end. It's part of my job." "If your boss has an issue with that, he can call me directly," I replied sternly, my patience wearing thin. Turning to Tracy, I couldn't help but express my frustration. "What were you thinking, indulging in the car's audio system with him?" Tracy attempted to feign innocence, but her actions had already cast a shadow over our relationship. Over the following weeks, tension simmered between us, creating a palpable strain in our once harmonious marriage. Yet, despite the distance that had grown between us, I remained hopeful that we could overcome this hurdle and restore the trust and intimacy we once shared. Months later, Tracy blindsided me with the news that we had been invited to Jackson's cottage by the lake for the July 4th weekend. It was to be a gathering of our boss, Jackson, his wife, and 2 other couples who were friends of Jackson's. Reluctantly, I agreed to attend, but Tracy was determined to go. The weekend getaway began on a positive note as we enjoyed leisurely sails on Jackson's expansive sailboat. The women looked radiant in their bikinis, and the men, including myself, were clad in casual swimwear. Jackson's physique stood out among the men, with his toned muscles and confident demeanor, but he didn't flaunt it. Despite being one of the older women in the group, Tracy exuded confidence and grace, effortlessly blending in with the youthful energy of the gathering. I noticed Tracy in her black bikini, which accentuated her 36C bust and shapely rear without revealing too much skin. At Jackson's cottage, he had a well-equipped grill in the backyard, along with a fully stocked refrigerator filled with beer, wine, and ice for cocktails. Jackson expertly cooked up some marinated steaks on the grill while we all lounged nearby with our drinks of choice. Jackson played the role of gracious host, taking care of Tracy, who seemed to be leaning on him more than usual, perhaps even more than she had at Christmas. The evening passed smoothly, and around midnight we all retired to our respective bedrooms, leaving Jackson alone in the main bedroom. Saturday kicked off with a visit to a nearby small town by the lake, a charming tourist spot filled with quaint shops. Most of the women returned with a few souvenirs. Afterward, we indulged in a sumptuous lunch featuring hearty sandwiches before engaging in a lively volleyball game. As the afternoon wore on, the drinks flowed freely, and by evening the grill was fired up again, this time for sausages and grilled pork. We gathered around for another delightful dinner, and later, when the boss, Tracy, and I were invited for a stroll around the lake. I thought it was a splendid idea, given the indulgences of the day. It took us about 30 minutes to circumnavigate the lake, and upon our return we found the group gathered around the table, chatting and laughing. However, my heart sank a little when I noticed Tracy sitting in a deck chair, leaning against Jackson with his arms around her waist. As we approached, Tracy smiled and rose with Jackson, though she seemed in no hurry, despite knowing it might not sit well with me. She avoided meeting my gaze and instead took a seat next to me for the remainder of the evening. It was then that I began to sense something amiss in our relationship. Throughout the evening, I noticed subtle glances exchanged between Jackson and Tracy when they thought I wasn't paying attention. As the night progressed and the party started to disband, the other couples retired to their bedrooms. However, Tracy beckoned me to the kitchen. Alone together, Tracy's demeanor shifted, and she looked me directly in the eye, her gaze unwavering. Then she dropped a bombshell that left me reeling. She confessed that Jackson had invited her to spend the night in his bed, and shockingly, she had accepted. I felt like the ground had been pulled from under me. It was difficult to process what Tracy was saying. She explained that it wasn't about love. She assured me of her fidelity over our 17 years together. Yet she expressed a desire to explore something different, to understand the sensation of being with another man, just for one night. The gravity of her words hung heavy in the air as I struggled to comprehend the situation. In disbelief, I stood there, grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. How could Tracy, my wife, whom I loved and trusted, ask for my permission to sleep with another man? It felt like a betrayal of everything we had built together, a betrayal of our vows. No way, I managed to utter, my voice strained with disbelief. You're not sleeping with him. Not tonight, not ever. But Tracy remained resolute, her tone unwavering. She insisted that it was happening, and I needed to accept it. To her, it seemed like a trivial matter, just one night of experimentation. But to me, it was a violation of the sanctity of our marriage, a breach of trust that cut me to the core. As the weight of her words sank in, I struggled to find a way to process the situation. It felt like my world was crumbling around me, and I was left grappling with the harsh reality of Tracy's request. As I left the kitchen and made my way to the living room, my heart sank when I saw Tracy holding hands with Jackson, heading towards the main bedroom. Tears blurred my vision as I tried to process what was happening. I stumbled to the minibar and poured myself a strong drink, needing something to numb the pain. After downing a few shots of Jack Daniels, I mustered the courage to quietly approach the main bedroom. Behind the door, I could hear the unmistakable sounds of intimacy between two people. It was like a knife through my heart, realizing that my life as I knew it was falling apart. Confusion and despair clouded my mind. My initial instinct was to leave and file for divorce, but the thought of leaving my children behind weighed heavily on me. Yet the betrayal I felt from my wife's actions was unbearable. In a moment of darkness, I even entertained thoughts of burning the house down, ending it all. But rationality prevailed, and I pushed those dangerous thoughts aside. Somehow, I must have drifted into an uneasy sleep, because when I checked my watch, it was already 3 in the morning. The house was silent, and I felt utterly alone in my pain. Dragging myself to the bedroom that Tracy had occupied, I found the bed still warm but empty. I collapsed onto the covers, exhausted both physically and emotionally, and drifted into a fitful sleep. The next morning, I woke up at 7:30, feeling drained and disoriented. I hurriedly showered and brushed my teeth before joining the others in the kitchen. The remaining 3 couples were already up, enjoying breakfast cooked by Mana, Lou's wife. Their greetings felt hollow, and I could sense their curious glances, wondering what had transpired the night before. The reactions of the other couples were mixed as they acknowledged the situation. While some offered sympathetic looks, others seemed uncomfortable, unsure of how to respond to the awkwardness of the moment. My own cheeks burned with embarrassment, feeling the weight of their understanding stares. "It's okay, Bobby, we've seen this before." Mana's voice carried a gentle tone, attempting to alleviate some of the tension in the air. Her words were met with nods of agreement from the rest of the group, each offering silent support in their own way. Lou, ever the analytical one, delved into Jackson's character, attempting to rationalize his behavior. Jackson is a classic alpha male. When he sees something he wants, he goes after it. And he seems to have a knack for situations that involve a bit of humiliation, he explained, his words tinged with a hint of resignation. However, Joan chimed in with a more pragmatic perspective, emphasizing the complexities of marriage and family. Breaking up a marriage over a single indiscretion seems foolish, especially when there are children involved. It's just not worth it, she asserted, her voice carrying a note of wisdom gained from years of experience. As the discussion continued, I couldn't shake the disbelief at what had transpired. Was Jackson truly a predator, targeting married women with children for his own satisfaction? The thought churned in my mind, adding to the turmoil already swirling within me. Ralph's voice broke through my thoughts, offering a glimpse of redemption for Jackson amidst the chaos. Despite this flaw, Jackson is a decent guy. He's loyal to his friends and he's done good by them in the past, he said, injecting a note of empathy into the conversation. Yet, amidst the conversation, the sounds emanating from the main bedroom served as a stark reminder of the reality of the situation. Tracy's dreams echoed the events of the previous night, casting a shadow over the breakfast table and staining the air with a palpable sense of discomfort. I felt really angry, so I turned pale. Mana suggested finishing breakfast out on the deck. After about 30 minutes, Tracy and Jackson came out to join us. Tracy looked like she had just taken a shower and was quite pleased with herself. I couldn't help but notice how Tracy seemed to be glowing with positivity, not hiding the fact that she had done something everyone knew about. She carried a plate of breakfast and went straight to a sun lounger where I was sitting. I moved my legs to make space for her. As she turned her back to me, I could see how pink her skin was on her back, just above her t-shirt. I noticed a mark, like a bite, on her right shoulder under her top strap. She didn't say much to me, just nodded when she sat down. I didn't see any reason to break the silence. Then Jackson, sounding cheerful, asked what everyone's plans were for the day. "I think we should head back and spend some time with the kids this afternoon," Mana said with a sweet smile. I mentioned something to Tracy, who was sitting in front of me, and she hesitated for a moment. I could tell by the way her hair swayed and her head moved that she rolled her eyes in my direction. It's funny how you pick up on these little things when you've been together as long as we have. But since she was facing everyone else, they all caught her eye roll too. It took every ounce of restraint not to reach out and tap her on the back of the head. I hoped we could linger a little longer, maybe enjoy the morning and possibly even go for another swim, but Tracy was firm in her response. "No, we have to go back," she said with finality. "You finish breakfast. I'll go load up the car. We'll leave in about 10 minutes. With a sigh, I headed back inside, feeling a mix of frustration and disappointment. I loaded up the car in record time, eager to get back on the road. When I returned to the deck, Tracy had just finished her breakfast. Without wasting any time, I grabbed her wrist and hastily said goodbye to the group. I practically dragged her to the car, feeling a surge of irritation bubbling inside me. I didn't need to look into their eyes to know what they were thinking. I could practically feel their judgment weighing down on me. The first 45 minutes of the drive passed in silence, broken only by the drone of the radio. Tracy sat mostly in silence, her gaze fixed on the passenger window. I had a feeling she was avoiding looking at me, perhaps afraid of what she might see in my eyes. Eventually, I couldn't bear the silence any longer. "Was it worth it?" I asked, my voice strained with emotion. Tracy didn't move for a couple of seconds, her silence speaking volumes. Then, with a deep sigh, she turned to me. "Yes, it was," she said softly, her eyes distant. Her answer caught me off guard. It wasn't what I had expected. I had anticipated some stammering, maybe a bit of truth mixed with a lot of excuses. But her response was clear, almost too clear. It hit me like a ton of bricks. 17 years together, 2 children, and all of it thrown away in one night, I muttered, more to myself than to her. Tracy shifted in her seat, her gaze meeting mine with a sad, almost defeated look. "It depends on you, Bobby," she said quietly. "I promised you it was only once, and I'll be as devoted to you as I was before. Last night was amazing, but it's over now. If you can't forgive me and move past this, then do what you have to do. But know that I'll take the children and make sure they know who tore our family apart." Her words hung heavy in the air, leaving me stunned and speechless. Not even an apology could undo the damage that had been done. She's going to blame me for our family falling apart. Maybe she and Jackson planned everything carefully. I've never seen Tracy act like this before, and I really didn't like it. It seemed like this morning's actions with Jackson were all planned to humiliate me. I asked Tracy if it was planned, hoping for some clarity. Her response didn't offer much reassurance. "Not really," she said, her words lacking sincerity. "He just wanted to invite me again before I commit to being faithful to you." As we stopped at my husband's relative's place to pick up the children, Tracy put on a facade of normalcy, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of discomfort around her parents, Ron and Judy. It felt like they somehow knew Tracy had betrayed me, and I felt a deep sense of shame and humiliation. Despite my urge to expose their daughter's deceit, I knew it wasn't the right time or place. Tracy wore a smug expression throughout our visit, relishing in my discomfort. It was clear that she took pleasure in my suffering, a misguided attempt to reconcile our relationship. Later that night, as we retired to bed, I turned away from her, my emotions in turmoil. But Tracy wasn't ready to let things be. She attempted to initiate intimacy, her hand reaching out to me in a desperate plea for connection. However, I couldn't bring myself to accept her advances. "Not tonight," I declared firmly, my resolve unyielding. "You can't expect forgiveness just because of what happened last night and this morning." For the first time since Saturday evening, Tracy revealed vulnerability. Her expression shifted from smugness to one of offense and shock, a rare occurrence in our relationship. But don't you want your kitten back? Jackson quipped, almost as if it were a reflex for men in such situations. His comment struck a nerve. Not only was he a real estate genius, but apparently he fancied himself an expert in psychology too. I couldn't help but feel a pang of frustration. Oh, he went there, I thought. His words revealed a lack of understanding. For some men, what Tracy did might be seen as a challenge, but for me, it felt like a complete betrayal. It was enough to make my stomach churn. Tracy's eyes widened at my unexpected outburst. In our 17 years of marriage, I had never spoken to her like this, let alone cursed at her. The tension between us was palpable. She withdrew her hand from my lap, and I turned away, pretending to fall asleep. Despite her quiet sobs, I couldn't bring myself to console her. My anger and disappointment clouded any sympathy I might have felt. The following week, I made an appointment with Marcus Rothstein, a respected divorce lawyer. The meeting didn't go well. Rothstein had to explain to me twice that my options were limited: either accept half of everything and custody arrangements for the children, or wait until the kids were older and then deal with the same situation. It was a bitter pill to swallow. The idea of living a scripted life where I played the role of a super dad until the children were grown, only to divorce Tracy once they were independent, seemed bleak and soul-crushing. Despite the turmoil in our relationship, I couldn't bring myself to expose Tracy's infidelity to her parents, Ron and Judy. During our visit to pick up the children, I couldn't shake off the feeling of discomfort around them. It seemed as though they somehow knew the truth, and I felt a deep sense of shame and humiliation. But I held my tongue, knowing that exposing their daughter's deceit would only cause more pain and embarrassment. Physically, I had distanced myself from Tracy for 6 months until she issued her ultimatum about fulfilling my male duties. Reluctantly, I convinced myself that I could have sex with her, even though it felt like a hollow, joyless act. It wasn't enjoyable, but she was still a beautiful woman. Our first night back together set the tone for what was to come in the following years. Despite the facade of normalcy, the cracks in our marriage were becoming impossible to ignore. Yet, amidst the turmoil, we had planned a date at one of our favorite Italian restaurants, a feeble attempt to salvage what little remained of our relationship. That evening, I decided to treat Tracy with 2 extra glasses of wine. Her reaction was unexpected. "Where did all this come from?" she whispered, clearly surprised. "Damn it, Bobby, now I'll have to wait another 6 months to repeat the performance," she lamented. Her words struck a nerve, leaving me momentarily speechless. I couldn't find the right response, so I remained silent and leaned against her back, feeling a mixture of frustration and disappointment. Each time I thought about Tracy with Jackson, a wave of anger washed over me. Our interactions had become tense and devoid of the gentleness we once shared. It felt like our relationship had shifted irreparably after that incident. Though she seemed to enjoy herself, we rarely embraced or spoke tenderly like we used to. To ease my doubts, I hired a private detective to follow Tracy once a month, ensuring she kept her word and didn't meet Jackson or anyone else. It was a costly measure, but it provided me with a semblance of peace of mind. 6 years later, our youngest child, Terry, decided to study at the University of Michigan, following in the footsteps of his older sibling, Melissa. Their decision sparked a rivalry between them all summer before they both left for school. When the time came to move Terry into the dorms, Tracy and I helped him settle in. It was during this process that I realized neither of us remembered taking half of what Terry brought with him. Tracy had kept her promise, but it served as a painful reminder of the vow she had broken 16 years earlier. That night, I confronted Tracy about the promise she had made and how she had discarded it. Despite my attempts to dissuade her, she insisted, even threatening to take my children away. It was a stark display of the power she held over me, especially when she ordered me to be served with divorce papers in front of my colleagues at Lou's gallery. The humiliation cut deep, leaving me feeling powerless and betrayed. Tracy cried as I spoke. It felt like Lou had just closed the loop that started 6 years ago at the lake house. The memory of our Sunday morning encounter with everyone in the house was still painfully vivid. It was the most humiliating moment of my life. "I bet I got my revenge," I said firmly. Tracy continued sobbing, but I noticed a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "6 years ago, you said sex with Jackson was wonderful. Do you still feel the same?" I asked, my voice heavy with accusation. "But I kept my promise to you," Tracy protested. "For 6 years, I was completely faithful." "In what way did you exaggerate your promise?" I retorted. "If your vow was only valid for 16 years, would your promise be valid for half that period?" "Bobby, I'm truly sorry if this incident leads to divorce, but I told you I didn't cheat," Tracy insisted, her voice trembling. "Yes, you did," I insisted back. "Just because you told me in advance instead of sneaking around behind my back doesn't make it right. We didn't discuss it. You and he did. We didn't agree to this. You and he did." I felt the weight of betrayal heavy on my chest. "You ripped my heart out that weekend, Tracy," I continued. "And on the way home you told me it was my problem and I needed to deal with it or you would take my kids. That doesn't look like love to me." Tracy looked at me, bewildered. She got herself a good lawyer who convinced the judge that we needed couples counseling. At the first session, the consultant, a young woman, asked why I couldn't get over Tracy's infidelity, especially since she hadn't gone behind my back or slept with Jackson. I stared at her incredulously, then asked if she'd ever been married. Her defensive response only solidified my doubts about counseling. "I'm leaving," I announced, preparing to depart. Both women remained motionless as I made my way out. Later that evening, I received a call from Ron and Judy, Tracy's parents. I had a deep affection for Tracy's parents, especially since I had lost my own parents several years ago. Their response to my love had always been warm, but in this matter, I knew they would side with their daughter. It's what parents do. On the speakerphone, Ron and Judy expressed their concern. "Bobby, why do you have to be so tough about this?" Judy began. "You know Tracy loves you with all her heart. She kept her promise to you, never having sex with anyone else again. Why do you have to be so inflexible?" I couldn't help but question what Tracy had told them about that weekend. "What exactly did she tell you guys?" I inquired. Judy explained, "Well, honey, she told us that you two talked about how she had sex with some guy one night, and then she promised she would be faithful to you forever. She told us the same thing she told you, instead of sneaking around behind your back, because she really loves you and doesn't want to lose you." "That's only half the story, Mum," I replied, feeling a surge of frustration. "Are you both sitting down?" I asked, bracing myself for their response. "We are," Ron answered shortly. "We didn't talk about her having sex with Jackson Aloysia Fairchild. She and Jackson talked. I warned her not to do this, but it didn't make the slightest difference. So they had fun that night, and just to be safe, they had a little extra fun time the next morning. Meanwhile, the rest of us sat in the living room, trying to carry on, before your daughter got too loud, and then we moved to the backyard. I've never been so humiliated in my life until I went home." "Does this look like a loving wife to you?" I questioned, frustration evident in my voice. "Does it sound like someone who truly cares about her husband?" "Did you live with her for another 6 years?" her father inquired. "No, I lived with the children for another 6 years," I replied bitterly. "And eventually I returned to your daughter, but love began to die that night and continues to fade a little every day. I'll never love her as much as I once did." Judy's crying filled the silence. "Sorry, son," she offered tearfully. "We didn't know the whole story." Ron added, We should have realized it would have been worse for you to just leave. Thank you for staying all these years, for the children. Tracy and her lawyer tried everything to drag out the divorce proceedings, which lasted about a year. Maybe Tracy thought I'd lose the will to fight and stay married. But she should have known better. Although I didn't realize it at the time, being an involved parent while my children were growing up enhanced my social standing and gave me insights into the personal lives of other parents. Once the divorce was official, I began exploring life anew. I went on day trips, visited restaurants, and danced at clubs on weekends. I found myself engaging in interesting conversations, often with divorced mothers of my children's friends or acquaintances. The saying, "If someone is willing to look, everything will be found," rang true. In fact, I had more sexual encounters and partners post-divorce than before I got married. Life wouldn't be so bad if I could just ignore the hole in my heart that Tracy had left. After the divorce, I moved into a 3-bedroom apartment, ensuring my kids had a place to stay whenever they wanted. Initially angry at Tracy, I hoped they'd eventually come to terms with the situation and maybe split their time between us until they left for good. For their sake, I hoped Tracy and I could reach some kind of agreement. I had no intention of facilitating Tracy's return into our lives. She had wronged all 3 of us, and I wasn't about to make it easy for her to reconnect with the kids. While I wasn't surprised that both kids chose to stay with me during college breaks, I was taken aback by how quickly Tracy's parents re-entered our lives. During the divorce proceedings, I didn't hear much from them, which I understood. But about 2 months after the divorce was finalized, Judy called and invited me to dinner at Maggiano's, an Italian restaurant in our city. Considering our previous good relationship, I saw no reason to decline, and we had a pleasant evening together. The dinner started on a slightly awkward note, with both Ron and Judy apologizing for Tracy's behavior and any tension that may have arisen from their support of her. I accepted their apology, acknowledging that they were just supporting their daughter. We changed the subject and the evening improved from there, despite occasional comments and tears about what could have been. Having Ron and Judy back in my life brought a sense of normalcy, and I believe they enjoyed my company as much as I appreciated theirs. We rarely discussed Tracy, except when reminiscing about past events. We met up a couple of times a month while the kids were at school, and even more frequently when they came home. It wasn't long before I introduced a new person into our gatherings. Amy and I started dating about 18 months after the divorce. I wasn't actively looking for a partner at the time, but fate had other plans. One Saturday night, Amy and her friends walked into the restaurant where my kids and I were having dinner. Melissa noticed them first and whispered to me excitedly, "Hey, Dad, do you see those women who just sat down? They all look good." "Jesus, Melissa, I don't need you to be my assistant," I replied, slightly exasperated. But Melissa was right. "She's right, Dad. There's some power on the table," Terry chimed in. So I glanced around, realizing my kids were onto something. "Maybe I really need you as my assistant," I told Melissa. After finishing dinner, I decided to let Melissa drive, handing her the car keys, and informed the kids that I would find a ride home through Uber. Walking over to a table of lovely ladies, I introduced myself, and they kindly invited me to join them. As we chatted, I sipped on Eagle Rare bourbon. "You just abandoned your kids to flirt with us. What kind of father are you?" Jennifer, a long-haired blonde at my table, questioned at 10 o'clock. "I'm a father who knows his kids have good taste," I replied with a smile. So, when they noticed 3 of you weren't wearing wedding rings, I had 2 options: go home and watch a baseball game while my kids beat the crap out of me, or come here. Maybe make a complete fool of myself, but at least earn some respect from my kids. "Wow, what a thing you have going on, big guy," remarked the married brunette at my side at 2 o'clock. Not a jerk, just a confident guy with 2 smart, chatty kids and good taste. As conversation flowed, Rose jokingly asked if I was the teacher. So, big guy, you tell your story to the class first, she said with a smile. And so I shared the Reader's Digest version of my life, from my former 17-year marriage to my recent divorce. Damn, Romeo, if you were such a wonderful guy, how did your wife run away? Angelica, a black-haired goddess at my 8 o'clock, interjected bluntly. There are 3 of us here who have gone through the divorce process, so we want to know in advance whether we should even waste time talking to you. I nodded in understanding. Straight. I like it, I replied. For the first time since my divorce 2 years ago, I laid out my entire story, even the most painful parts. The only people who knew the whole story were Tracy's parents and my divorce lawyer. As I finished, I saw tears in everyone's eyes. It was a raw and vulnerable moment. I found myself tearing up, touched by the kindness of the ladies. Well, that's one way to destroy a room, Carol remarked, reaching out to touch my arm gently. I'm so sorry, ladies. I try not to dwell on the past, I replied, trying to stay positive. Look on the bright side, I got 2 wonderful kids out of the deal, and my in-laws aren't too bad either. Your relatives? You've got to be kidding me, Angelique gasped. Now you're expanding the boundaries of my beliefs. No one loves their in-laws that much, especially after a divorce. What can I say? I'm special, I joked. If you ladies are done eating, here's a drink for me. It's my turn to listen to your stories. We sat like that for 3 more rounds until I had heard everyone's story. Jennifer got divorced because her husband was a serial cheater. Angelique and Carol's marriage ended due to irreconcilable differences. Rose, on the other hand, had been married to the best husband in the world for 26 years. She called him the best husband in the world several times, and each time the other 3 nodded in agreement. This is the person I need to meet, I thought to myself. The women mentioned they went to a bachelorette party once a month, so my presence was somewhat against the rules for Rose. However, Rose suggested that if she could bring her husband to the next outing, then I could come too. The other 3 quickly agreed. A month later, the 6 of us gathered at the same restaurant. I finally got to meet Sean, Rose's husband, and I left the meeting thinking he really could be the best husband in the world. We immediately found common ground. The 6 of us continued to dine out every month, and I began to see the 3 single women as good friends. Sometimes the 4 of us would do things together, and sometimes one of the women and I would go on a date. Some of the dates ended with us having sex, sometimes making love. They were all great in bed, no matter how we did it. I made sure to invest my best efforts in every aspect of my relationship with each of the women, particularly when it came to intimacy. The pleasure I found in satisfying them was immense, and judging by their enthusiastic responses, it seemed they enjoyed it just as much. After about a year of dating, Angelica and I decided to become exclusive. While I remained close friends with Jennifer and Carol, we all understood the shift that exclusivity entailed. Despite the occasional rough banter during their gatherings, my children quickly grew accustomed to Angelica's presence. However, it took her in-laws a bit longer to warm up to her. I wasn't in any hurry, knowing that building trust and comfort takes time. Having Angelica as a steady girlfriend marked the end of any lingering hopes for reconciliation between Tracy and me. Nonetheless, over time, Angelica's genuine qualities and our strong connection made it natural for my in-laws to accept her, gradually paving the way for a warm relationship. After Angelica had several conversations with my in-laws, Judy, Tracy's mother, pulled me aside for a heart-to-heart conversation. Her expression was grave, hinting at the seriousness of her message. "Bobby," she began earnestly, "I may not have the right to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. How long have you been dating this woman? Don't you think it's time to put a ring on her finger before someone else gets such a brilliant idea?" Although I tried to maintain a serious demeanor, inwardly I couldn't help but feel a surge of happiness. You're right, Mum. I need to lock this girl up, I responded with a chuckle. Despite my casual tone, I was beginning to realize the depth of my feelings for Angelica, and Judy's words struck a chord. Then do it quickly, you big fool, she replied, a hint of amusement glimmering in her eyes, revealing her genuine affection for me. About 6 weeks later, I decided to celebrate Angelica's 47th birthday in style. I suggested she dress up for the occasion, and her choice of attire, a stunning little black dress, left me speechless. Angelica's figure, untouched by the changes of childbirth, remained youthful and toned. The dress she wore, elegantly ending a few inches above her knees, accentuated her curves, leaving an indelible impression of grace and sophistication. As we sat together at the restaurant, celebrating her special day, I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment and gratitude for the beautiful woman by my side. It was moments like these that affirmed the depth of my affection for Angelica and the bright future I envisioned with her. On the evening of our engagement dinner, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Angelique, adorned in a breathtaking dress that accentuated her every curve, radiated beauty and elegance. As we sat down to dine, I found myself entranced by her presence, struggling to maintain my composure in the face of such overwhelming emotion. Throughout the meal, my thoughts were consumed by the ring nestled safely in my pocket, waiting for the perfect moment to make its appearance. When dessert arrived, accompanied by a bottle of champagne, Angelique looked puzzled. "We didn't order champagne," she whispered to me, her brow furrowed in confusion. "I did," I replied with a mischievous smile, revealing my hidden agenda. With trembling hands, I retrieved the ring box from my pocket, the weight of the moment sinking in. As I gazed into Angelique's eyes, I knew that this was the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. With a steady voice, I poured out my heart, expressing my love and devotion to her. And then, with bated breath, I opened the box to reveal the dazzling diamond ring nestled inside. Tears welled up in Angelique's eyes as she beheld the ring, her emotions overwhelming her. Amidst her tears, she managed to utter a soft yes, sealing our commitment to each other in that intimate moment. The restaurant seemed to fade away as we embraced, the world around us melting into insignificance compared to the love we shared. Our wedding, which followed a few months later in the gentle embrace of spring, was a celebration of our love and commitment. Surrounded by our closest family and friends, we exchanged vows of eternal love and fidelity. Terry stood by my side as my best man, his presence a testament to the strong bond we shared as father and son. Rose, radiant in her role as Angelique's matron of honor, added a touch of grace and elegance to the proceedings. Tracy, my ex-wife, was notably absent from the festivities. While her absence may have caused some discomfort for Ron and Judy, Angelique and I were determined to focus on the future rather than dwell on the past. Our relationship was built on mutual respect, trust, and unwavering support, and we were eager to embark on this new chapter of our lives together.